What if I told you that the way we view gender is destroying our society's self-esteem?
From birth, we're bombarded with messages about how we should be masculine or feminine and how we should present ourselves to the world.
These binary norms have a profound impact on our perception of self, especially when it comes to gender and sexual identity.
Today, we're diving deep into the world of the male and female gaze, exploring how they contribute to harmful stereotypes and what we can do to challenge its impact. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective Podcast. My name is Carbon.
And I'm Emily.
And welcome to the show. While this is a binary discussion and we are going to be using male and female archetypes as a generalized subject, this is something that affects all of us outside of the binary and the queer community in particular as well. Let's start with the male gaze. What is it? Can you define it for me?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think these whole notions of the male and female gaze is actually something that came from television. The male gaze is really the portrayal of women as sexualized objects for the male consumption. And so the message from this is very clear, and it's that women must conform to certain beauty and sexualized standards to be desired by men.
I think it's pretty easy to conclude how the male gaze, for example, has damaging effects on those that identify as men, and also for those that don't fit into that mold. It can often be a mental health issue for a lot of people that develops because of its existence. Generally, amongst the straights, we can see that men generally chase for this male archetype that you see in movies and in mass media, and it's very much something that is sought after. If you think, for example, in the bodybuilding world, or if you think of certain characters in media like Fight Club or like Wolf of Wall Street, this is like the stereotypical male archetype that I think men in general are taught to chase after, and that is something that a lot of men in particular, base their value off of. So you have to have like the physique, the six-pack abs, you have to have wealth, you have to have power, and all of these things is based on what I believe men think that women want. Something that has been coming up a lot on TikTok, however, is that the more bro-y that you go with the money and the cars and the wealth and the power, the more dudes that you get in your comments saying, "Nice, bro." Whereas like there's less comments from women.
I think it's actually funny, to be totally honest. Yeah. And this, of course, again, we're getting into kind of these generalizations, but you'll see, again, on TikTok, like you said, it's like the difference between the male and the female gaze. And we'll get into what the female gaze actually is. But to me, if I'm going to give examples of it, the male gaze, like you said, it's like the Wolf of Wall Street, the bodybuilder, like super jacked freaking dudes that like don't cry, aren't in touch with their emotions, versus the female gaze. To me, it's like the thirst traps that will come up on my bisexual TikTok, which is like a man cooking, a man who is like in touch with his emotions, who's like showing you how to go on like an adventure outdoors. You know what I mean? It's like these like more cute granola boys. You know what I mean?
Granola.
It's like, to me, it's like the dudes who would probably be dating a bisexual girl.
That is the difference between the male and the female gaze. So the male gaze more so seeks to please other men, ironically enough, which is, like I mentioned, the physique and the power and the wealth, whereas the female gaze generally is more so about nurturing capabilities and emotional capabilities. So that's why you see, for example, literally every boy band or boy pop star that has ever existed has never been this huge dude with like a bodybuilder type that is like suppressing his feelings and not emotional at all. Quite the opposite. They get super into their emotions. If you think about even more modern pop stars like Harry Styles, he's a super feminine dude.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And majority of his fans are women.
Exactly.
And queer people.
Exactly.
Which
Yes.
is tea and interesting. That's a really good example.
I was doing some research on the female gaze and the male gaze and why generally the women are not attracted or as attracted to the male archetype as men seem to be. One of the reasons that were brought up was because if you have all this money and wealth, power, and this physique that is, you know, one of a Greek god, to them, that is actually signaling generally, again, we're being general here, it typically signals aggression and volatility. So, for example, he's more likely to cheat. And he's less likely to be nurturing and be a good caretaker, for example, or a good father down the line. It's just very funny that a lot of typical men seek to be this archetype, where a lot of, generally speaking, typical women don't even want that out of a partner. In what ways have you personally experienced the negative or even positive effects of these norms?
My own experience, I can say that it has impacted me in really big ways, but also just based on our experience with interviewing a lot of queer people, I can tell that this is something that has impacted almost everyone.
Yeah.
Really, truly. So let me get into it. For me personally, it's this experience of being in elementary school to high school, I think is when it first starts to really impact you. And it's this feeling of needing to fit in. This needing to fit in is attached to the male gaze and the fact that you are wanting to appease the male gaze and sexualize yourself at this very young age, which is so strange. And for me, where it really came from was the magazines I was reading.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
A lot of magazines.
Even the teen magazines.
Especially the teen magazines.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, it was like Teen Vogue, 17 magazine, all of them. It's like all of the content in them was really just based around attracting men.
Yeah.
Which is so sad, but it's like that was a lot of what I was consuming growing up. And I feel like this also definitely transfers over to all of the TV shows you're watching when a lot of the plot line in majority of like teen movies is dating and relationships and like the girl wanting to be with the guy or something along those lines, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to TV shows that are in particularly directed at young girls, now looking back at it, I would notice that generally the girl would be generally good looking, but not like model type good looking. And typically she'd be a little awkward or a little quirky so that you could relate to her. But her goal was to get this model type guy, right? And usually this quirky girl ends up with this model type guy in the end to sort of give the viewer, which is usually a young teenage girl, hope that she can get this model type guy, and not only hope, but this expectation that she should. If you think about like Lizzie McGuire with Ethan Kraft, and if you think about Amanda Bynes and She's the Man, she's even dressed as a dude, she gets this like model dude that everybody wants.
Yeah, no, it's really true. And this was so much of the media that I was consuming growing up and that so many of us were consuming growing up. I think things are starting to shift and get a little bit more three-dimensional with like women and queer characters. We're starting to see that. I am noticing that more and more, especially with Netflix, is that they're giving more depth to these characters, like giving them more interests and personalities aside from just wanting to be with a boy. When you're at that very insecure time in your life, which is like 11 to 17 is such an insecure time in your life when you're going through all these changes, everything's so new to you and you feel so embarrassed, like you feel like you should already know all of these things. And that's also why I was like desperately consuming all of these magazines. I'm like, give me the information.
I would buy mountains of magazines and I would have posters all over my wall, as probably a lot of people did.
I'm interested to know like what teenagers are doing now, like what's substituting magazines in your life?
TikTok perhaps?
I guess TikTok.
But I think a lot of Gen Z these days is going towards that more, that in between, that is not the female gaze, it's not the male gaze, it's like somewhere in between. So like, for example, Timothée Chalamet, like he's not a super buff dude with this like no emotion kind of thing. He's actually a pretty skinny lad with like a lot of like emotions, and they focus more on his talents and his kindness, generally speaking, with Gen Z than they do on his looks.
Yeah, honestly, that's a really good point. And I think it does really show that the male gaze really does come from media, because I think there has been a big shift lately of women directors, more queer directors, you know what I mean? And it shows what gaze things are coming from, and it's starting to make the world of the media more three-dimensional. I think there's so many other issues that are facing younger generations right now with TikTok and with like beauty norms and influencers and that whole world around it. But I feel like at least they're getting more representation to show what they could be and what is possible than what we received when we were younger.
For example, we're seeing now that you don't even have to be like this wildly famous movie star to have a big following, right? And the reason for that is because people are seeking more normal looking people that speak to their values and that they can look up to.
It does make you lose yourself in those really vulnerable ages.
Yeah.
And what happened for me is throughout my youth, like up until probably age 10, I felt like I knew exactly who I was.
Right.
You know, I would wear whatever I wanted to school. None of it was flattering. You know what I mean? Whatever quote unquote flattering is. But all of it was like I would read a lot of like Vogue magazine, and I would like try to put these looks together with like Value Village and like H&M clothes, you know what I mean? And like just wear all of this like costume jewelry and silliness and like high heel boots and everything. But then I got to age 11, and these conversations, I started seeing like the magazines that my sister was reading, and I started like looking at them once she was done and then buying my own. At that point, I started thinking about, well, how do my clothes make my body look? And how does it make men think of me? Like, how do the boys in the class, how are they looking at me based on what I'm wearing?
Oh, absolutely.
You know? And then it started being more about, how does this shirt show off my boobs? How does how do these pants make my butt look?
Yeah.
You know? Versus like, how does this outfit make me feel? And that's where I really, really lost myself at that point. It was like, I completely stopped dressing as an individual, and I started kind of wearing like a uniform. And what that uniform was when we were growing up, I think probably a lot of people will relate to this. It's like the TNA or Lululemon stretchy pants, you know what I mean? That make your butt look good.
Yeah. Everybody had like 20 of those.
Exactly, because it's the only thing you're allowed to wear.
Yeah.
And then you'd wear like moccasins just because like it made you as short as possible, because you don't want to be taller than the guys, especially for me as like a tall person. It's like that was always one of my biggest insecurities.
You don't want to piss off the short kings.
Exactly. So that your shoes have to be as flat as possible, and that was moccasins.
Everybody wore flats.
Yes. If for shirts, it was literally just like whatever made my boobs look good. And that would always get me in a lot of trouble because I have big boobs. So I would always get like dress coded all the time.
Because I went to a Catholic school, we had uniforms. And that actually provided a lot of relief for me, because there was less pressure to be this like super girly girl costume kind of thing. But whenever I wanted to impress outside of school, I did go that route. You know what's interesting is that as I started to realize who I am and started to come out, then the opposite happened, but still within those archetypes.
That's
the opposite
what I was
happened.
going to point out, and that's what I feel like is what men before coming out, before transitioning, whatever, it's like what society puts on young boys, quote unquote, is you have to be so masculine dominant. You can't cry, all of these things. You need to be like really butch, basically. And then when you come out as like a lesbian, as queer, as one of these things, you totally go from being this like female
archetype to this male archetype. That's exactly what I did. I was like, well, only these two things exist, so I gotta pick one. I can't like be queer and be a female archetype. Then how would people know that I'm queer? You know, like that was the whole thing. So I would dress like butch to the gills, like, you know, and I walked different. Like I walked as masculine as I could. Mustard. Ketchup, and I walked as masculine as I could ketchup and mustard.
It's funny as like us being two like women identifying people, and that's happening to us. We're like thinking of what the media told us that other women want. You know, rather than us just as two women being like, what do I like?
Yeah, exactly.
Like what? It doesn't make any sense. Like, the information is in your head.
I also feel like these archetypes of the male and the female gaze also create a lot of internalized misogyny. Like, when I came out as queer, I thought I had to be one of the boys, you know? I was like, okay, does this mean that I don't have any more friends who are girls and I should do like boy things because that's what lesbians do, and I should like play the sports and like I don't know,
should I be everyone's bro now?
Yeah, I have to be the bro, and I have to like dress a certain way and like
and talk like them about women. It's funny because what actually inspired this conversation for us is we're so late to the game, but we started just watching The Circle now, and we're on season 1. Yeah, so I'm referencing season 1, which is like such a dated reference at this point, but if you watched it, let us know. So on the first season, there's this lesbian named Karen pretending to be Mercedes, which is like a very like male gaze type of woman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The way that Karen speaks about Mercedes, it just screams internalized misogyny. Like, it just feels like, oh, it feels like you hate other women.
In our opinion.
It was coming out like she had to speak about women the way that she thinks men speak about women. And I was hearing her speak worse about other women than the other men on the show would speak about the women. You know what I mean? It was like, why are you talking like that?
Yeah, it was very odd because she was like, I'm a lesbian, 1,000.75. I've never been with a man. Like, I love women, this, and that. But then would turn around and say, like, oh, women are so catty, or like, I'm so sick of like girls treating me a certain way. And to be fair, she probably did get treated a certain way because she was very visibly like the typical butch lesbian, not to generalize her. There's obviously a lot more layers to her. But when it comes to looks, you could categorize it.
And that's how she'd categorize herself.
I feel like because of these archetypes, she was also put in this box by other people. And she was put in a box probably by herself as well, and just by society in general, which she became very seemingly angry at. Potentially, she's unaware of how she is sort of projecting those stereotypes and that resentment that probably built up over the years. I'm personally just speculating. I cannot say for sure. It just seems that that was what was coming across.
Yeah, like you're basically adopting the system's tools, which were used against you and made you so jaded. Now you're adopting them and using them against other people, basically as kind of a shield, you know, to protect yourself.
Which is often what happens in general with people that feel like they have to guard themselves.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's this over-sexualization of other women. It's like the way that you dress, the way that you act, the way that you have to put yourself into like this gendered box still. But I do feel like as a whole, we're shifting away from it. Like, majority of the interviews that we've done with other people while filming Turning Heads has been that I went through this phase and now I'm out the other side.
Yeah.
You know, and now I'm re-finding myself.
Yeah.
And I'm finding who I am outside of the gender binary, outside of like the male and the female gaze.
Yeah.
Who am I without all of society's expectations? And I think that's really powerful. And we're seeing a lot of non-binary people specifically who are leading the way on this, of telling everyone, like, you do not have to exist in the system. Like, it's fine if you still want to use she, her, he, him pronouns, but you still don't have to exist in that system. And that's why, like, I really highly, highly respect and value all of the work that so many non-binary, like, advocates and leaders are doing for our community as a whole. And even just for, like, people who are cis and hetero, I think it gives so many people permission to just be who they are.
Absolutely. Which leads me to my next question. Is androgyny, or even being non-binary, the cure?
Legit, yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's definitely what I was getting at there, for sure.
I absolutely think that it's the cure. Even if you don't necessarily identify with non-binary, I think that androgyny in general is becoming more mainstream, so to speak. I think it's the antidote to these heavily opposite binaries that we used to uphold as a society. We're like running away from that now. We're turning away from it. Really, I think that people that are trans people, non-binary people really outside of that societal norm are leading the way with who we believe that we can become and really seeing ourselves for who we are.
And I mean, if being hyper femme or hyper masculine does feel good for you, that's totally fine as well.
Then do it. Yeah.
You know, like there's no judgment on either side. I still feel like I'm a very hyper femme person. And after rediscovering myself afterwards, it's like, that's still who I am. I'm just not doing it anymore for men or for to appease men. I'm doing it to make myself feel good.
Exactly.
You know? And then on other days, I feel like I can just wear clothes that make me look like a big colorful blob and I don't care. You know what I mean? It's like I feel like I can do no matter what and feel good, and I'm dressing for myself,
which is really the goal.
I think just like the prompt and how I've gotten to this like this mental place where I am now that feels a lot healthier and like refinding myself is like really asking yourself questions like, who was I before society had an impact on me? You know, like who was I maybe before the age of 9? How did I like to act? What did I like to wear? What mattered to me? And then also is like, am I wearing this for myself? Who am I dressing for? Who am I cutting my hair for? Who am I wearing makeup for? If the answer isn't for yourself, really reflect on that. You know, and think about if you were dressing for yourself and you didn't care about what anyone else thought, what would that look like for you?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
You know, and if it's totally different, I think there's a path ahead of you of just like some new self-discovery, which can be scary, but it can also be really exciting. And there can be a part of you that's sad that you lost yourself for so long. Yeah. That can be really sad and really scary, but it's also so beautiful that you're rediscovering yourself right now.
I agree.
And focusing on that is what's really nice.
Absolutely. The last question that I have for you is, how can we as consumers and for ourselves as content creators just be more mindful of the media that we're creating and more importantly, the media that we're consuming?
It's hard to do that, you know, and I think we're actively working towards doing that all the time. But I think that's why it's always important to bring in so many different perspectives onto everything that we create. I think it's hard to notice sometimes, and I really appreciate when people like call us out in the comments, you know, in a positive, nice way. But when people like point out when something that we shared is a stereotype or patriarchal or binary kind of concept that we're sharing, and sometimes we don't recognize that because all of us grew up and were conditioned under this system. Sometimes it's hard to separate what ideas are original and are true to how you really feel versus what's an idea that was sold to you growing up. As the two founders of this organization, which is based on the whole notion of creating content that is an accurate and positive representation for people of the queer community, it's like that is a really big job, and we have been very much actively unlearning so many things so that we can make this content what it is. And it does mean that sometimes we don't get it perfectly right, but it does mean that we're always working on making each iteration of what we're doing better than the last. What would you say about that question?
Well, I think in terms of consumerism, it is about like diversifying your physical, literal and virtual bookshelves, right? So the content that you consume, whether it's on Netflix or on YouTube or the podcasts that you listen to. Now that can be hard for people because what they know is what they know, right? What they don't know is typically really hard to find. I think it also does have to do with exposing yourself to new friends. Typically, friends will be like, hey, did you watch this thing? It's really good. I think friends often recommend content or media that is outside of your scope and can teach you brand new things.
Yeah. So diversify your friend groups, diversify your bookshelves, diversify the content that you're consuming.
Yeah. In conclusion, the male and female gaze do have a profound impact on our perception of gender, body image, and sexual identity.
By recognizing the harmful impacts of these norms and embracing a more fluid approach to gender identity, we can challenge and reject harmful stereotypes and create a world that truly reflects the complexity and diversity of all human beings.
So, diversify your stuff
and really identify where the ways that you're expressing your identity is coming from and who you're trying to please.
So that is everything that we have for you today. If you want to dive deeper into how the new generation is challenging these norms, click this video right over here. Please do hit subscribe because we make these podcasts weekly, and until next time, peace.